The chair hit the floor at 2:14 in the morning. Not a crash, just the quiet tip and settle of a desk chair on commercial carpet, and then the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a place that's supposed to have people in it. The overnight security guard found her first. Sabine Fenwick, senior accountant at Marret Holdings, was slumped forward across her desk, her cheek pressed against a column of figures she had been reconciling for 19 consecutive hours. One hand still loosely gripped a red pen. The quarterly close report was spread open beneath her forearm, and every margin had been filled with her careful, small handwriting. Corrections, cross-references, questions, right up until the moment her body made the decision her mind had refused to. Someone called upstairs. 2 colleagues appeared in the doorway within minutes. One reached for her phone. The other said, quietly, that they didn't do 911 here. They stood uncertain, watching Sabine's breathing come in shallow, barely visible intervals, while the fluorescent lights of the accounting wing hummed overhead like they always did, indifferent to everything. Then the elevator at the far end of the hall opened. Caspian Marret had been in a strategy session on the 14th floor when the radio call reached his head of security. He had stood up without finishing his sentence, without excusing himself, without explanation, and walked out while 3 senior associates were still mid-presentation. He came into the 8th floor the way he moved through every space. Not loudly, but completely, as though he had always been the center of gravity in that room, and everything else was simply orbiting around him. He was still in his suit jacket. He had not brought anyone with him. He looked at Sabine for 3 seconds. At the toppled chair, the scattered reports, the woman who had not moved. Who authorized this shift schedule? His voice was the kind of quiet that made people check their own breathing. No one answered. He didn't ask again. He crossed the room, moved the papers carefully to one side, and lifted her. Not hurriedly, not impatiently. With a steadiness that suggested he understood this moment required something more careful than strength alone. His head of security stepped forward immediately. "Sir, let me." "No." Caspian was already moving toward the elevator. "Get Dr. Pemberton. Tell him we're coming up." The hallway went very still after he left. No one who worked the 8th floor had ever seen Caspian Marret come down to their level. They knew his name the way people know the names of large weather events. Something distant, capable, and not particularly interested in any one of them specifically. He had not once, in the 3 years she'd worked there, acknowledged Sabine Fenwick's existence directly. She had preferred it that way. She was very good at being invisible. She had practiced it. He carried her to the private medical suite on the 3rd floor himself. Dr. Pemberton was waiting. He assessed her with the brisk economy of a man who had spent years working in places where speed mattered more than bedside manner. Severe dehydration, blood pressure dangerously low. He started an IV and ordered monitoring through the night. Caspian stood near the door and waited until the doctor had finished. Will she recover? Yes, but only because it happened when it did. Dr. Pemberton met his eyes. Another shift like this and I genuinely couldn't tell you the same. Caspian said nothing for a long moment. He looked at Sabine in the hospital bed, at the IV line running into her arm, at the stillness of someone whose body had simply stopped cooperating, and felt something he had not expected to feel. Not guilt, exactly. Something quieter and more honest than guilt. The particular discomfort of realizing that something important had been happening very close to you, and you had not been paying the right kind of attention. He made 4 phone calls from the hallway, cancelled tomorrow's board session, postponed the Hartwell dinner, pushed the acquisition call to end of week. His executive assistant didn't ask questions. Nobody who worked for Caspian Marret asked questions about decisions he had already made. His 5th call went to Yvonne in human resources. I want every timesheet submitted under Sabine Fenwick's employee number, every shift log, every overtime record, every approved substitution. Tonight. A brief pause. Of course, Mr. Marrett. May I ask? No. He ended the call. He went back inside and stayed. By 6 in the morning, Caspian had read 14 months of Sabine Fenwick's schedule twice. What he found made a particular kind of sense that only becomes visible when you understand what it means in practice. She had been working at nearly double her contracted hours for over a year. Some of it was logged as voluntary overtime. Most of it appeared in the records as shift substitutions. She had covered for colleagues, filled gaps, absorbed work that had been improperly distributed from above. He convened a meeting in his office at 7. Millicent Ford, Director of Operations, arrived first. She was composed, polished in the way that requires preparation. Behind her came Yvonne from HR, and a senior accounts supervisor named Clive, who looked like he hadn't slept. Caspian placed the timesheet summary in the center of the table and let it sit there. Explain the distribution. Millicent straightened slightly. The overtime was voluntary. Miss Fenwick has always been willing. Willing. He repeated the word without inflection. She never complained. Millicent's tone remained even. We accommodated her requests for additional hours. Clive looked at the floor. He was the kind of man who had stayed quiet about things for too long and knew it. Caspian noticed. Clive. The older man lifted his head. He was quiet for a moment longer, the kind of quiet that precedes a decision. Then he set his coffee cup down. Sabine didn't take those shifts because she wanted to. His voice was careful, measured. She took them because Millicent's team kept scheduling gaps that fell on junior staff, and Sabine was the one who caught it every time. She fixed the problems before they became your problems. A pause. She just never made sure anyone knew it was her fixing them. The room was very still. Yvonne opened a secondary file she had not been asked to bring. She placed it in front of Caspian without comment. He opened it. The pages inside were printouts of internal memos. Each one headed Anonymous Review. Internal Audit Flag. He had been receiving them in his inbox for 2 years. He had acted on everyone. They had flagged a structural weakness in the quarterly close process that would have triggered an external audit. They had identified an irregular pattern in vendor payments that, on investigation, revealed a low-level embezzlement since corrected. They had caught 7 months ago a tax categorization error that would have been extraordinarily costly to resolve after the fact. He had assumed the memos originated from an outside consultant. He had, when he thought about it at all, assumed they came from someone whose name he would recognize. These are hers. He said it not as a question. She submitted them through the anonymous tip line, Yvonne said quietly. I traced the submission timestamps to the terminal on the 8th floor. Her workstation. Caspian turned another page. Clive exhaled. She didn't think anyone would act on them if they knew who she was. She figured if she put her name on them, they'd get routed through Millicent, or ignored. He looked at Millicent as he said it. Millicent said nothing. There was another file. This one Yvonne had hesitated to include. A flagged HR note from 18 months ago, documenting an incident Sabine had not formally reported. Someone at a company event had told her, in front of several colleagues, that she looked like a liability at client-facing functions, that her appearance was not consistent with the firm's image. The note had been marked resolved, which meant, in practice, that Sabine had told HR she was fine and walked away. Caspian read it twice. He thought about the woman asleep 3 floors below him. He thought about 2 years of quiet, precise, anonymous work that had protected his organization without anyone ever knowing to thank her for it. He thought about the 18 months of double shifts and absorbed exhaustion, and a woman who had clearly decided at some point that the safest path was to be smaller, quieter, less visible. Not because she lacked capability, but because she had learned that capability and visibility were somehow in contradiction for her specifically. He closed the file. Prepare a full review of Millicent Ford's management record. Every HR incident, every staffing decision she made over the past 2 years. I want it on my desk by Friday. Millicent's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. And find out why, Caspian said, not loudly. My senior accountant believed that working herself unconscious was a more acceptable option than asking for help. No one had an answer for that. Yvonne lingered after the others left. She came back to the table and placed one final document in front of him. Medical billing records, 18 months of them. Name, Theodore Fenwick. Relationship to employee, brother. Diagnosis, spinal injury following a construction accident. Treatment, ongoing physical rehabilitation, 3 times weekly. Every additional dollar Sabine had earned in overtime had gone, almost exactly, to cover what insurance didn't. There were no luxury purchases in the spending pattern, no vacations, no savings, only invoice after invoice from a rehabilitation clinic in South Chicago, and every week a transfer that cleared out most of what she had. Caspian sat with that for a long time. He went back downstairs. He was sitting beside Sabine's bed, reading a brief he wasn't fully processing, when he felt the movement. Her fingers shifted, a faint, searching motion across the blanket. The nurse on the other side of the room stepped toward the door. Mr. Marrett, I think she's waking. He stood. Sabine's eyes opened slowly, fighting the light. The ceiling was the wrong ceiling. The room smelled like antiseptic and something softer. White peonies in a vase on the side table that she didn't understand the presence of. Her left arm felt strange, and when she looked down, eyeline taped carefully to the back of her hand. She frowned. Tried to remember, the quarterly close. Column 47B throwing an error, reaching for the red pen, and then nothing. Her hand moved without her quite deciding to move it, the way you reach for something solid in the dark. Her fingers found warmth. She held on. For several seconds, she didn't open her eyes again. Whatever she had found felt steady and unhurried and real, in the way very little else felt real at the moment. When she finally turned her head, she saw him. Caspian Marrett was sitting beside her hospital bed with her hand wrapped loosely around 2 of his fingers. He was not looking away. He was not performing concern. He was simply there, present in the way he was apparently, present whether or not it aligned with anything she would have predicted. The color that rose to Sabine's face was instantaneous. She released his hand and tried to push herself upright. The room tilted. His other hand came to her shoulder before she got anywhere. Easy, said evenly. Dr. Pemberton said no sudden movement for at least another hour. She stopped. She looked at him. She said the thing she always said when she didn't know what else to say. I'm sorry. And then, before he could respond, the quarterly close. I hadn't finished reconciling the Eastern accounts, and the board review is Thursday, and if someone could just pull the file from my workstation. Sabine. She stopped. He said her name the way people say names when they want you to understand they are talking to you, specifically. Not to the function, not to the role, to the person. You woke up in a hospital bed, he said, and your first word was an apology. Your second sentence was about work. He paused. You haven't asked how long you were unconscious. You haven't asked what happened. You assumed you were the inconvenience. She opened her mouth. That, he said, tells me considerably more than 14 months of timesheets. The silence that followed had weight. Sabine looked at the IV line in her hand. She was aware, suddenly and uncomfortably, that she had been unconscious in this man's building, that he had clearly not left, that there were peonies on the table she couldn't explain, and that Caspian Marrett was looking at her with an expression she could not locate in any category she had previously assigned to him. "I didn't want to cause a disruption," she said finally. "You collapsed." His voice wasn't unkind. "That is by definition a disruption." "I mean," she stopped, tried again. "I know how it looks. I know I'm not the kind of person people notice doing the work. I thought if I kept doing it quietly, kept it clean, kept it correct, eventually it would matter in some way that..." She pressed her lips together. "I'm not explaining this well." "You're explaining it perfectly," he said. "That's what concerns me." She looked at him. "I've been acting on your recommendations for 2 years," he said. "The anonymous memos." Something went very still behind Sabin's eyes. "I assumed they came from an outside firm." A pause. "I was wrong about that." She said nothing. "The audit flags, the vendor irregularity, the tax categorization in Q3 last year, every one of them." He watched her carefully. "I acted on everyone." The silence was different now. "I didn't know," she said very quietly, "if anyone would take them seriously if they knew who sent them." He held her gaze. "They came from you. I should have known they came from you." 3 weeks later, the Moret Foundation's annual gala filled the Meridian Hotel ballroom with 600 people and twice as many calculations. Chicago's business community treated it as a mandatory performance, appearances tracked, conversations monetized, every element of presentation read as signal. Sabine had almost not come. Harriet Marrett, Caspian's aunt, and the woman who had run the foundation's charitable arm for over a decade, had appeared at Sabine's apartment on a Tuesday evening with a garment bag and an expression that did not invite discussion. "You have spent 3 weeks in that apartment being sensible," Harriet had said. "You can be sensible again on Thursday." So Sabine came. She wore deep burgundy. She had done her own hair. She told herself she would stay 90 minutes, thank the relevant people, and leave before she became someone's anecdote. She had not accounted for Millicent Ford. The formal board review of Millicent's management record was still in progress. The process was deliberate, and Millicent technically retained her title until it concluded. She had entered the gala in that window of ambiguity, and she had not spent the 3 weeks prior becoming a more forgiving person. She found Sabine near the edge of the room within 20 minutes. "I didn't expect you here." Her voice was pitched precisely loud enough. Several nearby conversations paused. "This is a little outside your usual environment." Sabine turned to face her. "Good evening, Millicent. I heard Harriet Marrett personally invited you." A thin smile. "Funny what a hospital stay can open up." The people nearby were definitely listening now. Sabine kept her voice even. "I'd rather not do this here." "Of course you wouldn't." Millicent tilted her head. "People like you do your best work when no one's watching." A deliberate pause, anonymously. Several guests near enough to catch it exchanged glances. Sabine felt the familiar pull, the instinct to make herself smaller, to absorb it, to move away. She had practiced that instinct for years, until it operated below the level of conscious decision. She did not move. "Yes," she said, meeting Millicent's eyes. "I do work well when no one's watching. That's how I caught the vendor irregularity, and the audit exposure in Q2, and the tax categorization error that would have cost this organization 8 figures if it hadn't been corrected in time." The quiet around them sharpened. Millicent's composure held, but something underneath it didn't. "You submitted those anonymously because you knew no one would take them seriously from." She stopped. "Recalculated. From your level." "From my level," Sabine repeated. "You know what I mean." "I do," Sabine said. "That's why it matters that you said it out loud." The room had gone quiet in an expanding radius. Millicent recognized it a half-second too late and took one step forward. Not quite deliberate, not quite accidental. and Sabine's heel caught the edge of the floor runner on the polished marble. She felt herself going, and then she didn't. An arm caught her waist with the kind of steadiness that doesn't happen by reflex. A hand at her shoulder, firm and measured. She opened her eyes and found Caspian Marett beside her, having apparently crossed the room in the interval, between the moment it became a problem and the moment it became irreversible. He looked at her first. "Are you hurt?" "No." She found her footing. "I'm fine." "Good." He kept one hand lightly at her back and turned to face the room. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "Mrs. Fenwick has been with Marett Holdings for 3 years. He addressed the ballroom the way he addressed a boardroom, directly, without hedging. In that time, she identified and corrected 3 significant financial exposures that the rest of the firm missed entirely. She did it while working hours that should never have been authorized. She did it while directing nearly her entire salary toward her brother's medical rehabilitation. She did it without recognition and without once asking for any. 600 people were not moving. "She did it," Caspian said, "because she is the kind of person who solves the problem first and decides later whether anyone deserves to know it was her. I am standing here because I believe she deserves to know. Everyone in this room does." The applause began slowly, then it didn't stop. Sabine stood beside him and felt the strange, new, disorienting sensation of being visible in a large room without wanting to disappear from it. That was different. She had spent years becoming practiced at invisibility, not from lack of capability, but from a learned understanding that visibility had costs she was always somehow being made to pay. Tonight, the room had tilted onto a different axis, and she was still standing on it. She turned to look at Caspian. He was already looking at her. The formal review concluded the following week. Millicent Ford's employment ended on a Wednesday. The documentation was thorough. When security walked her out, she didn't look back. Within a month, Marett Holdings had published revised staffing policy across all divisions. Overtime caps, mandatory rest intervals, an internal reporting line that routed directly to Caspian's office without going through anyone positioned to suppress it. Managers would now be evaluated partly on the well-being of their direct reports. Every executive understood, without being told explicitly, that these policies had not originated in a conference room. Sabine returned to work with a schedule that Caspian had personally reviewed before she saw it. She objected immediately. "This has me leaving at 5. "Yes. The quarterly close is in 3 weeks. There's no possible way. You'll have 2 additional analysts assigned to your team by end of week." He didn't look up from the brief he was reading. "The close will be covered." She stared at him. "You can't just..." "I can." He turned a page. She stood in his doorway a moment longer. "I've never had a manager who argued with me about working too much." He looked up then, and something in his expression shifted, not softly exactly, but with the quality of a man deciding to say something he has been thinking about for a while. "I've never had an employee I needed to have that argument with." She left. She stood in the hallway for a full minute afterward. Their conversations lengthened in the way conversations do, when the people having them have stopped pretending they are having them only for practical reasons. Breakfast before his early calls. The longer route through the building, when neither of them suggested the direct one. One evening, in the corridor where the Marett family photographs lined the wall, Sabine paused before a portrait near the window. A woman in her 50s, painted with the direct expression of someone who had stopped apologizing for having strong opinions. "She looks like she didn't take much from anyone," Sabine said. "She didn't." Caspian stood beside her. "She also had a habit of telling me things I didn't want to hear at exactly the moment I needed to hear them. Sounds dangerous." It was. I relied on it entirely. The silence between them was comfortable in the way only shared understanding makes silences comfortable. Then Sabine turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression she had not quite let be visible before. "I need to ask you something." He waited. "Why me?" Not quite a question. She had been building toward it for weeks. "There is no version of this that makes the expected kind of sense. I know what I look like. I know what circles you move in and what those circles expect." Her voice stayed steady because that was what she knew how to do. "I spent 3 years being very careful to take up exactly as much space as I'd been allocated, because anything more was going to cost something I couldn't afford to pay." She met his eyes. "So I want to understand. Why?" He was quiet for long enough that she almost wished she hadn't asked. "Because," he said, "the most important decisions I made in the past 2 years were made on the basis of your thinking. I didn't know it at the time. I know it now." He held her gaze. "Because you saw a problem in my organization that no one else saw, and instead of using it for leverage, you fixed it and slipped the answer under my door unsigned. Because when you woke up in a hospital bed, your first instinct was to apologize for the inconvenience." A pause. "Because that is not how someone who has been valued correctly behaves. And I have spent the past month being angry about that, in a way I'm still figuring out what to do with." He took one step closer, not overwhelming, just close enough that she was no longer standing alone in it. "And because it is not a small thing," he said, quieter now, "to be the person who makes sure someone eats dinner and actually means it." She looked at him. "The catering note," he said. "Thursday board nights. The additional tray sent to the 14th floor." The color moved through Sabine's face completely and without mercy. She had added the note quietly to the kitchen order sheet for months. One additional meal, plainly set, tucked into the standing catering order, with enough ambiguity that no one would trace it. Because the dinner hour logs she reconciled showed he never ordered for himself on those nights, and she had found that detail, for reasons she couldn't fully justify, unacceptable. "I thought it was an administrative standing order," he said, and there was something in his voice that was as close to warm as she had ever heard from him. "I was wrong about that too." She laughed. It came out more genuine than she had intended, and more relieved. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, not urgently, not as a demand, the way you extend a hand when you want someone to understand they have a choice. Sabine looked at it. She looked at him. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, steadily, without any of the uncertainty she had been half expecting, like something that had already been decided and was only now being said aloud. "You kept this organization from several significant disasters," he said, without asking for a single thing in return. "I was doing my job." "You were doing considerably more than your job." He held her hand. "And I intend to spend a long time making sure you understand the difference." The announcement came the following week. Director of Financial Integrity, Maret Holdings. A new office, a proper team. A title that said clearly, in writing, that her work had always mattered, and that from this point forward, the organizational chart would reflect it. At the press briefing where the restructuring was announced, a journalist raised her hand. "Mr. Maret, you've appointed a former mid-level accountant to a director-level position, overseeing firm-wide financial integrity. What specifically convinced you she was the right choice?" Caspian glanced toward Sabine, seated in the front row, before he answered. His expression did the thing it only seemed to do with her. "She's been doing the job for 2 years," he said. "We're catching the title up to the person." The room applauded. Sabine looked at her hands and made a private, losing effort not to cry in front of journalists. Later, on the rooftop of the Meridian with Chicago spread out below them, she leaned slightly against his shoulder. "I used to think," she said, "that being dependable meant making sure no one ever had to worry about you. He looked out at the lights. And now? She thought about the 19 hours at her desk. About Teddy, who was 3 weeks into a new phase of rehabilitation and had sent her a video that morning. 10 steps without the parallel bars, and she had cried about it alone in her kitchen at 7 a.m. because there had been no one to cry in front of. She thought about a hospital room and a hand she had reached for without thinking, and how thoroughly embarrassed she had been about it for exactly as long as it took Herb to realize. He had not let go first. Now, she said, I think being dependable means showing up, including for yourself. Caspian turned to look at her. She slipped her hand into his. First this time, the way you do something, when you've stopped waiting for permission to do it. Neither of them looked away from the city, which was very large and very bright, and not the least bit interested in what was, or wasn't supposed to be possible. That was fine. Neither were they.